Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
You send us what you're reading and watching, the articles, the interviews, the online chatter, and we dig through it to give you the sharpest insights, the stuff that really matters. It's about getting you up to speed, fast. And today, you've given us a fascinating set of materials focused on Ye, the artist formerly known as Kanye West. This deep dive is all for you.
Exactly. And you've compiled a really comprehensive picture here. We're looking at a lengthy, unfiltered interview transcript with DJ Akademiks from YouTube.
Right.
Key moments from his Drink Champs appearance, also YouTube. An analysis of that Akademiks interview from Hot New Hip Hop, and then some biographical details to give us, broader context.
So our job here is to cut through the noise and understand the recurring themes, the main arguments, and the bigger story behind Ye's recent statements and actions based entirely on what you've shared with us. Okay, let's get into it.
It seems like a key starting point, something that kind of weaves through both the Akademiks and Drink Champs conversations, is Ye's strong sense of being betrayed, of being used by the industry, and of feeling like his ideas and creative outputs are being stifled or censored.
Right. In the Akademiks interview, he's pretty vocal about feeling abandoned by people he thought were in his corner in the industry. He doesn't just hint at it. He talks about specific instances where he felt, a lack of loyalty or support.
And this feeling of betrayal really connects with his perception of being exploited. He brings up brands, and Adidas is like a prime example, where he feels they capitalized on his cultural cachet, his trend-setting influence, his popularity, and his creative work to generate huge profits.
Right, they made bank off him.
Huge profits. But then, when he started expressing controversial opinions, they quickly distance themselves. It's that sense of being valued for what he could produce until he said things they didn't agree with.
He definitely feels like he was a valuable asset until his views became, problematic for them. And that leads straight into this idea of censorship he keeps bringing up. He mentions an old Jay-Z tweet that got taken down. Apparently, someone convinced Jay-Z to remove it, and he regrets it. He sees it as an instance of Jay-Z, like backing down under pressure.
And the Drink Champs interview really highlights this sense of his voice being suppressed, particularly relating to the White Lives Matter shirt incident.
Oh, yeah.
He states that his 4 scheduled stadium shows were canceled right after that. So in his mind, this is a clear example of his ideas being shut down, of facing real-world consequences for expressing a viewpoint that went against, the established norms.
Okay, now we're moving into territory that's undeniably more complex and troubling. Across both interviews, Ye repeatedly brings up the Jews and this concept of a hidden influence, an invisible hand, that he believes controls significant parts of the music and entertainment industries.
It's crucial we address this directly because it's a prominent and, frankly, disturbing element of his recent statements. In the Akademiks interview, he says quite explicitly that the Jews move in the tunnels. They move where you can't see them, their invisible hand. He then goes on to suggest that this alleged entity uses threats to exert control, citing examples like tours being canceled or artists being dropped from labels as evidence of this supposed coercion.
And he reinforces this idea of the Drink Champs conversation too. He claims there's a pattern within the Jewish community of taking in talented black artists, profiting from their work, and then, in his words, discarding them.
Yeah, he uses a stark comparison, suggesting that while someone like Ahmet Ertegun's children are well provided for, the children of Stevie Wonder, he implies, might not be because of this dynamic.
That's quite a claim.
Furthermore, he claims that the Jewish media has been actively working against him, creating what he describes as a crazy narrative around his actions and statements. Again, this reinforces his belief in a coordinated effort to control public perception and specifically undermine him.
Now, it is absolutely vital that we are clear about this for you, our listener. These are Ye's stated beliefs and claims taken directly from the sources you provided. We are reporting on this content impartially to understand what he is saying. But this is in no way an endorsement or validation of these ideas.
Precisely. Our role is simply to analyze the content of these sources. Okay, so moving on from these claims about hidden influence, we also need to discuss his use of swastika imagery, which he brought up in the Akademiks interview.
Yes, that was a particularly shocking moment. He describes wearing a swastika chain as being like a magnet. His explanation was that it would provoke a strong reaction and, in his view, cause people to expose themselves.
It's a deeply offensive and historically charged symbol, isn't it? And his explanation suggests a deliberate intention to provoke outrage as a means to reveal what he perceives as hidden agendas or biases.
So a confrontational tactic based on shock value.
Pretty much. Essentially saying he used the swastika to provoke a strong reaction, hoping to reveal what he believes are people's true feelings or, hidden agendas.
He also makes some rather unusual comparisons in the Akademiks interview. He likens his situation and Puff Daddy's to the dynamics involving Dio. We're assuming he means the musician Ronnie James Dio and Adidas.
Yeah, that was a bit confusing.
It's not immediately clear what specific parallel he's trying to draw there without more context, but it seems to tie back to this recurring theme of artists feeling exploited or mistreated by larger entities.
Yeah.
What do you think he might be trying to convey with that analogy?
It's speculative, of course, but given the context of feeling used by brands like Adidas, he might be drawing a parallel to situations where artists feel their creative work or legacy has been somehow mishandled or not fully respected by commercial interests.
Okay.
It's maybe another way he's trying to frame his experiences within a broader narrative of power dynamics in the industry. He also mentions wanting to do things more when he knows what woke people dislike,
Right.
seeing it as a way to weaken the enemy. This reveals a really combative attitude where intentionally provoking a negative reaction from certain groups is seen as, like, a strategic move.
And of course, we can't forget the White Lives Matter shirt incident, which he brings up again in Drink Champs, reiterating his belief that it led directly to the cancellation of his stadium shows.
Yeah, that event clearly remains a significant point of contention for him, reinforcing his feeling of being censored and punished for expressing his views.
This feeling of being censored really comes to a head with that incident.
And in the Drink Champs interview, he makes a particularly contradictory statement regarding anti-Semitism. He says he has something against the Jewish people as a whole, yet almost immediately claims, we are Semite, we Jew, so I can't be anti-Semitic.
Matter. Doesn't quite track, does it?
It reveals a complex and arguably confused understanding of the term and its meaning.
Adding another layer, he also expresses a sense of jealousy towards the Jewish community in the Drink Champs interview. He mentions being envious of their unity, their business practices, their collective stance on issues like abortion. It's an unusual mix of criticism and what seems like admiration.
It is strange. You mentioned his jealousy of the Jewish community's unity. Did the sources offer any specific examples of what he's referring to?
He doesn't really go into specific examples in these excerpts, but the context suggests he's referring to a perceived strong sense of community support and maybe shared economic power. It's more of a broad observation than a detailed analysis.
Okay. And to provide some broader historical context, the biographical information you provided reminds us of his past praise of Hitler on Alex Jones's InfoWars.
Right, that wasn't an isolated remark.
No, and it indicates a pattern of making highly offensive and disturbing statements.
That's a deeply disturbing statement, and as the biographical information notes, it's part of a pattern.
The biographical text also mentions a February 2025 anti-Semitic rant on X, where he reportedly professed love for Hitler and was selling swastika t-shirts on his website, even advertising during Super Bowl LIX.
Wow, so this points to a continued pattern of these deeply troubling expressions. And these controversial statements, as we'll see, have had very real consequences for his business ventures.
Yeah, definitely. Shifting gears now, let's look at the deeply personal issues he raises, particularly concerning his family and custody arrangements. In the Akademiks interview, he voices significant concerns about his children's name and likeness ownership.
Okay.
He claims he doesn't have 50-50 rights and believes a white woman in this white family, presumably referring to Kim Kardashian and her relatives, have control.
This feeling of not having enough say in his children's lives and how they are presented is a recurring theme for him, isn't it?
Very much so. And he escalates this concern by suggesting that the Jews and whites above the Jews are trying to pull his kids into the Illuminati system.
That's a very specific and alarming accusation. When he talks about this invisible hand or these groups, does he offer any concrete evidence in the interviews, or is it more of a feeling or interpretation of events?
Based on these sources, it appears to be more of a deeply held belief and an interpretation of his experiences rather than specific, verifiable evidence presented in the interviews themselves. He connects various events and perceived slights to this broader framework. He expresses a fundamental frustration that he has no say-so over his children's upbringing and public image. The sense of powerlessness seems to fuel a lot of his anger and anxieties.
This frustration spills over into the Drink Champs interview, where he makes the really serious claim that the Kardashians kidnapped his daughter and that he didn't even have her address.
Yeah, those are very strong accusations pointing to a significant breakdown in their co-parenting relationship.
Definitely.
He also mentions his disapproval of his daughter North being featured on a Cardi B song in the Akademiks interview. This highlights his desire to control his children's involvement in the entertainment industry, even at the young age.
And the Drink Champs interview touches on another painful family matter, the conflict around his children's birthday party, where he claims he wasn't invited. These instances paint a picture of a father feeling increasingly marginalized in his children's lives.
Moving beyond his immediate family, the sources also reveal a complex web of relationships and conflicts with other artists in the music industry. In the Akademiks interview, he makes some quite pointed remarks about Jay-Z, stating that Jay-Z hasn't helped him with his kids and that he's not really family. This suggests a significant rift in what was once, a close professional and personal relationship.
His feelings about Drake are also interesting. He describes it as being like family members that you don't F with.
Yeah.
But acknowledging Drake's cultural significance, even placing him above Kendrick Lamar in terms of importance, it's a nuanced, if somewhat strained, view.
He makes a rather bold claim in the Akademiks interview, suggesting that his song Moon basically ended Frank Ocean's career.
That's quite a statement.
It's a strong statement with little evidence provided to support it, but it reflects his often assertive and sometimes, grandiose perspective on his own impact.
He also reveals some past aspirations and opinions about collaborations. He mentions wanting Drake to be his writer and Travis Scott his producer, indicating a past vision for a collaborative creative team.
And his criticism of Virgil Abloh after his passing in the Akademiks interview is particularly noteworthy.
Yeah, that was rough.
He expresses a sense of betrayal and perhaps resentment, even though Abloh is no longer alive to respond. This seems connected to his broader feelings of being undermined by those around him.
He doesn't hold back when discussing Don C., Matt Williams, and Jerry Lorenzo either, labeling them with a homophobic slur and alleging they worked against him behind his back.
Wow.
This paints a picture of deep distrust and animosity towards former associates.
And his issue with Kendrick Lamar saying he's #1 in rap, as mentioned in the Akademiks interview, reveals a strong sense of competition and a firm belief in his own preeminence in the genre. He definitely sees himself at the top.
To provide some context, the biographical information reminds us of his past successful collaborations, though. With Jay-Z on Watch the Throne, with Kid Cudi on Kids See Ghosts, and more recently with Ty Dolla $ign on the Vultures Project.
Right.
This shows that despite these conflicts, he has a history of significant artistic partnerships.
Turning our attention to business and financial matters, Ye raises some interesting points in both interviews. In the Akademiks conversation, he reiterates not owning the name and likeness of his brands 50-50 with his children.
Linking it back to the control issue.
Exactly, linking it back to that earlier point about control.
He also compares his catalog's financial benefits, meaning his body of work and the rights associated with it, to Jay-Z's, suggesting a disparity that likely fuels his frustration with the industry's power structures.
And in the Drink Champs interview, he claims to have invested over $150 million into simplifying communities, which is a rather vague statement.
Yeah, what does simplifying communities even mean?
It's hard to say definitively based just on this, but given his recurring themes of wanting more control and feeling like existing systems are flawed, it could be an attempt to build alternative structures outside of the established norms. Maybe.
Possibly. His experience with the Gap and Adidas, which he discusses in Drink Champs, really highlights the power dynamics at play, though. He clearly feels that despite the massive financial success of these collaborations,
huge success,
he was ultimately undervalued and easily discarded when his views became controversial.
And the biographical text underscores the severe financial consequences of his anti-Semitic remarks, noting the termination of numerous lucrative business partnerships, Adidas, Gap, Balenciaga, etc., leading to a significant drop in his reported net worth.
Yeah, those actions had real-world impact on his bottom line.
Big time. This illustrates the real-world impact of his statements on his professional life.
It's impossible to discuss Ye without touching on the topic of mental health and personal struggles. He acknowledges his past hospitalization and the crazy narrative that has surrounded him in both the Akademiks and Drink Champs interviews.
Yeah, he's aware of how he's perceived. He has also spoken about experiencing suicidal thoughts in the past, as mentioned in the Akademiks interview. This vulnerability, offers a different perspective on some of his more erratic behavior.
The biographical information notes his past diagnosis of bipolar disorder, although it also points out that he has publicly questioned this diagnosis at times.
Right. Which highlights the ongoing complexity of understanding his mental health. It's not straightforward.
And more recently, the biographical text states that in February 2025, he claimed to have received a professional diagnosis of autism.
That's a significant new piece of information, isn't it? It could potentially reframe how some of his social interactions and communication styles are perceived.
Potentially, yeah. The biographical information also includes a serious allegation from his former chief of staff about a potential nitrous oxide addiction.
Right, which, if true, could be another contributing factor to his recent behavior and decision-making. Lots of layers here.
Definitely. Broadening the scope now to his views on society and culture, he shares some interesting, if sometimes disjointed, theories in the Akademiks interview. He touches on the idea of media decentralizing and ultimately harming communities.
He also expresses a sense of empathy for Latin communities, feeling that ICE is treating them in ways historically similar to the treatment of Black communities.
That shows a capacity for broader social awareness, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe seeing parallels in systemic issues. He mentions his belief that the Black dollar has been so decentralized, which seems to tie into his desire for greater economic empowerment within the Black community.
And he offers a rather cynical view of celebrity culture, suggesting that celebrities act as false idols, distracting from a true God. This perspective might explain some of his own ambivalence toward the trappings of fame.
That makes sense. In the Drink Champs interview, he voices a general disillusionment with leadership, stating his belief that the world is led by the least noble and the most greedy.
A very critical worldview.
Yeah, it contributes to his overall critical and often contrarian stance on things.
Looking at his political aspirations, the biographical information reminds us of his somewhat quixotic presidential run in 2020 under the birthday party.
Right, the birthday party. And despite that previous attempt, he stated his intention to run again in 2024, although his attorney later clarified that he was not a candidate.
So, back and forth. It suggests an ongoing, if perhaps inconsistent, interest in political office.
The biographical text also notes his past support for Donald Trump, followed by later criticisms, highlighting his shifting political allegiances.
And the highly controversial meeting with Trump and Nick Fuentes, a known white nationalist.
Yeah, that was major.
Along with his subsequent praise of Hitler, as documented in the biographical information, are critical points in understanding the trajectory of his recent public statements and associations.
Absolutely crucial context. Finally, let's consider the context of the DJ Akademiks interview itself. The Hot New Hip Hop article offers an interesting perspective.
What's their take?
They suggest that the interview is part of Ye's attempt to punish everyone around him and somehow bring hip-hop down to his perceived level.
Interesting theory.
The article argues that Akademiks provides a platform that aligns with Ye's goals of free speech, or perhaps more accurately, unfiltered expression, and caters to a specific demographic that Ye is trying to reach.
So it's not just venting, there's a strategy.
That's the argument. It's not just about expressing himself. There's a perceived strategy behind these appearances.
So after this deep dive into the material you provided, it's clear that we're looking at a really complex and, frankly, often contradictory picture of Ye.
Definitely complex.
The central story seems to be one of a persistent feeling of being wrong, battling against perceived enemies both within and outside the industry, and expressing increasingly extreme and disturbing beliefs.
Absolutely. We've seen these recurring themes of feeling betrayed and censored, the articulation of deeply controversial beliefs, significant family and custody issues playing out very publicly, and a range of conflicts within the music industry, all contributing to this complex narrative.
And it's important to remember, this deep dive is based solely on the material you shared. We haven't offered any definitive conclusions or endorsements of any of the viewpoints expressed within those sources.
Right, just analyzing what's there. This brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Considering all the various perspectives and claims we've explored, the feelings of betrayal, the controversial beliefs, the very public personal struggles, what do you see as the most significant underlying drivers of Ye's current trajectory?
Good question.
And what are the potential implications not just for him personally and his family, but for the broader cultural landscape given his continued influence? We encourage you to revisit these sources with these questions in mind and form your own informed opinions.